I always thought life ended with death, no heaven, no hell, just emptiness. I took pride in my logical reasoning. I loved debating with believers, dismantling their arguments with science and logic. Religion seemed like a crutch for the weak, for those who needed to believe in something because they couldn't handle reality. I grew up in a devout Catholic family, where Sundays were sacred and Holy Week was observed with deep devotion. My mother never missed a mass, always with her rosary in hand, whispering prayers for us all. I remember sitting beside her as a child, watching her close her eyes in utter peace while praying, but I never understood that faith. While I lost her in a cruel, unjust way, the little faith I had died with her. One day, on my way home from work, I called to tell her I'd visit, but instead of her sweet, loving voice, I received devastating news my mother had been a victim of a robbery. I rushed to the hospital hoping to find her alive, but when I arrived, her body was already covered with a white sheet. Her rosary, soaked in blood, still clutched in her hand. The emptiness I felt was overwhelming. In that moment, I decided to erase God from my life. Years passed, and I became a successful man, money, women, and an impeccable reputation in business. But with each achievement, my arrogance grew. I loved making religious people feel small, ridiculing them in public. Sometimes, seeing someone praying on the street, I'd laugh and say, "Look at him begging an imaginary being for favors." However, something strange began to happen. At first, the dreams were hazy, just shadows moving in the darkness, voices whispering incomprehensible words. But over time, they intensified. I saw tall figures with glowing eyes watching me from the dimness. Some nights, I woke with the feeling that someone was in my room, breathing near my ear. One day in my office, I noticed a figure in the glass reflection, someone standing behind me. I turned instantly, but no one was there. A chill ran down my spine, unlike anything I'd ever felt before. I dismissed it as stress, but the occurrences continued, whispers in the dead of night, flickering lights when alone, a shadow moving down the hallway. I ignored them. I believed in nothing, and that disbelief came at a high cost. One night, after a long day at work, I left late. I'd had a drink or two, not enough to lose control, but enough to relax. I drove down the lonely road connecting the city to my home. The night was unusually dark, with no stars in the sky. Suddenly, a silhouette appeared in the middle of the road. I slammed on the brakes, but the car skidded. I felt the impact, the sound of metal twisting, the shatter of glass, then silence. I opened my eyes, but something was wrong. There I was, seeing myself, my body, trapped in the wreck, covered in blood. My heart stopped. How could I be seeing my own body? I tried to move, but something held me suspended in the air. Then an indescribable sensation washed over me. I wasn't alone. An unnatural cold filled the air. It wasn't the chill of a cold place, but something deeper, bone-chilling, making me tremble despite having no physical body. I heard a voice, deep and resonant, a whisper that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "I've been waiting for you." The presence enveloping me was not normal. It was heavy, dense, as if the air itself was charged with malice. I tried to speak, but my voice wouldn't come out. Then, at a few meters from me, a silhouette emerged from the darkness. First, I noticed his feet in shiny black shoes, then his dark, well-pressed pants, his elegant jacket, and finally his face. He was a man of impeccable appearance, in a designer suit, hair perfectly combed, and a smile that somehow didn't seem human. "You always said there was no God." His voice was deep, with a strange echo vibrating in my head. He looked at me with a gleam in his eyes that was anything but divine. In the eyes of the jester, there were no pupils, just two dark pits reflecting an abyss. He always mocked those who believed in heaven, welcoming them to the other side. As I encountered him, a shiver ran through my core. My mind scrambled for a logical explanation, but for the first time, none was forthcoming. I tried to move, to run away from this eerie being, but it was futile. I was ensnared in a paralysis, as if space itself held me captive. "You've earned your place," he said, extending a hand. His skin was pale, too smooth, too perfect, not human. I didn't want to touch him, knowing that if I did, something dreadful would ensue. I resisted with all my might, trying to scream, but no sound emerged from my lips. Then I felt a violent pull, an invisible force dragging me toward him. Suddenly, the ground vanished beneath my feet. I fell at an impossible speed through a void dark, endless. The wind whistled in my ears as my body plummeted into the unknown. Amidst the fall, I heard his laughter, a deep, resonant sound that didn't just travel through the air, but reverberated within me. The fall was unending, with no up or down, no air, just an infinite chasm consuming me. I tried to scream, but the sound choked in the void, as if space itself was pulling me in, leaving me voiceless, breathless, with no escape. The screams began softly, whispers trailing in the vacuum, but soon turned into piercing cries as if countless souls were being torn apart around me. I closed my eyes tightly, trying to deny the horror I heard, but the screams were undeniably real. Suddenly, the fall ceased, not with a crash or a jolt, but unnaturally, as if an invisible hand had caught me midair. Floating in the nothingness, when I opened my eyes, my blood ran cold. Before me lay an impossible sight. The sky was not a sky, devoid of stars, moon, or light, just an absolute blackness stretching endlessly. A flickering red glow in the distance revealed a landscape alien to our world. The ground was rough like hardened ash, and with each step, it crunched beneath my feet. Something moved underneath. I leaned closer for a better look, and horror struck me. They were bodies. Bony hands emerged from the earth as if thousands of souls were trapped just beneath the surface, trying to escape. The air was thick, hard to breathe, with an unbearable stench of burnt flesh, sulfur, and decay. Clutching my nose did nothing to stop the rising nausea in my throat. The landscape sprawled with gigantic towers on the horizon, built of a dark, twisted material as if the very stone was alive, with rivers of lava winding between structures, illuminating figures writhing on their banks, not rocks, but people. This couldn't be real. My mind refused to accept what I saw, having grown up believing hell was just a fable, a myth to scare the unlearned. But here I was, witnessing with my own eyes what I never deemed possible. Some souls were submerged in lava up to their chests, screaming in agony, yet never dying. Others were consumed by creatures lurking in shadows, tearing their flesh repeatedly. The cages were the worst, endless rows of rusted bars holding people who sobbed with vacant stares, lost in unending suffering. I saw men in elegant suits with melted gold jewelry embedded in his skin, visions of women in fine dresses, stripped of their beauty, transformed into skeletal, terrified figures. These weren't ancient specters or souls from another time. They were modern people, just like me. Isn't it beautiful, don't you think? The demon's voice boomed in my ear, so close it made my skin crawl. I turned abruptly, and there he was, smiling beside me. I hadn't heard him approach. He wore the same impeccable suit, but his eyes glowed with an unearthly light, reveling in my horror as if showcasing his home to a special guest. "This is the destiny you chose," he said. I shook my head, unable to stop my body from trembling. It couldn't be true. Everything I had denied, everything I had scorned, now became my reality. I struggled to breathe, as if the very air refused to enter my lungs, as if hell itself enveloped me, claiming my disbelief. My skepticism crumbled before the single truth I had never wanted to accept. I was in hell. The demon moved forward calmly, as if strolling through his own home, while I could not move. Every fiber of my being shook. I knew if I tried to run, there would be nowhere to go. This place was a labyrinth with no exit. "You still don't fully understand, do you?" His voice was seductive, almost kind, yet laced with poison. He watched me like a predator enjoying the praise, struggle, and fear. "Come, I want to show you something." I did not walk of my own volition. An invisible force pulled me along, compelling me to follow him. I tried to resist, but it was futile, as if the shadows themselves pushed me forward. We approached a corridor where louder screams pierced the air, not simple moans. but souls torn by unimaginable suffering. What I saw next took my breath away. In the center of a dark room, surrounded by flames, rows of people knelt with fiery shackles on their hands. They didn't seem to burn their skin, but every time they tried to move, they screamed in pain. The demon nodded toward them. Like you, they thought faith was for fools. My eyes scanned the figures. Some seemed strangely familiar, men and women in modern attire, their faces twisted with anguish, terror, and guilt. But there was something worse. They were forced to pray, and the flames grew each time someone tried to stop murmuring the words of prayer. Some resisted, clenching their mouths shut, but their bodies shook until, in a scream of agony, they gave in and continued praying. Do you understand now? My heart pounded so hard I felt it could burst from my chest. All my life, I mocked those who prayed, claiming prayer was useless, that God didn't exist, that it was pointless to ask for help. He leaned closer with a mocking smile. Well, here you are, praying for all eternity. I felt a lump in my throat. No, this couldn't be happening. My words came out as a whisper, almost as if trying to convince myself. But before I could process it, someone screamed my name. A chill ran through my entire body. I turned with my heart in my mouth and saw a chained figure with skin marked by burning scars and eyes filled with desperation. It was a friend of mine. It couldn't be. I froze, recognizing him as an old college buddy with whom I often debated the non-existence of God. Together, we scoffed at believers, ridiculing faith at every opportunity. His face was unrecognizable, not just from the burns, but from the absolute terror in his eyes. I had never seen a man so shattered. Brother, his voice broke in a sob. We were wrong. We were wrong. He shook the chains in desperation, but couldn't break free. My mind shattered into a million thoughts. If he was here, this meant it was real. The demon laughed, enjoying my anguish. Oh, do you remember him? He used to laugh at the religious just like you. But here he is, paying the price for his arrogance. I turned to the demon, my stomach churning with horror. No, this isn't fair. He doesn't deserve this. My own voice surprised me. Since when did I care about God's justice? The demon tilted his head, curious. Oh no? Then tell me, who does deserve this? I had no answer. For the first time in my life, I was without words. The demon fell silent, watching me intently. With a smile, as if anticipating the shattering of my very sanity, my friend continued to weep. Whispering broken prayers, I never expected to hear from him, the same man who once mocked faith, now praying with a soul in tatters. I tried to approach him, but an invisible force held me back. The chains binding him were not mere shackles, but living shadows that tightened with each of his struggles. I felt an urge to scream, to demand answers, but something inside me knew it would be futile. Come, there's more to see. The demon snapped its fingers, and the scene transformed instantly. We didn't walk. We appeared elsewhere, as if space itself had folded to its will. What I saw took my breath away. It was a city, or what remained of one charred buildings, cracked streets, and a blood-red sky. The first thing I noticed were the shadows, not people, but spectral figures wandering aimlessly. Some weeping, others screaming, trapped in an eternal loop, reliving the same moment over and over. The demon crossed its arms and sighed with satisfaction. They always like to think hell is just fire and brimstone, it said, but here, each soul receives its own unique torment. I turned slowly, trying to process this grim tableau. To my right, a well-dressed man with gold rings, a politician, a businessman, someone powerful in life, sat at a table laden with exquisite food he couldn't eat. Each time he tried to take a bite, the food turned to ash. His hands trembled with desperation as his stomach growled with hunger, his cries and pounding on the table never ceasing his torment. I swallowed hard, noticing a beautiful woman in designer clothes and jewelry a few meters away. She walked with grace, as if still on a runway, but her reflection in the mirrors was covered in sores and deformities. She looked on in horror, clawing at her face until it bled, but her reflection never changed. Vanity, ambition, selfishness here, each soul received what they had nurtured in life. I turned to the demon, my stomach churning. What What about me? It was the first time I asked, the first time I allowed myself to contemplate my fate in such a place. The demon let out a low chuckle. Oh, don't worry. Your punishment is special. The demon said no more, only smiled, and that smile chilled my soul. My breathing was ragged. Fear was no longer something I tried to hide. I had witnessed the suffering of others, but now the demon had made it clear that my punishment would be unique. Come was not an invitation, but an order. I felt my body move against its own will, appearing in a large, dark hall. There was no fire here, no cries, no wandering shadows, only emptiness. Then I saw a giant mirror with a frame black as obsidian. It didn't reflect the hall or the demon, only me. My reflection seemed normal at first, but then moved on its own and spoke to me. You always thought you were clever. The voice was mine, but laced with contempt. My reflection sneered, mocking me for scoffing at those who prayed, who had faith, thinking it all superstition. And now look at you. The reflection laughed a sound that was my own laughter, making me feel sick. But worse was yet to come. The mirror began to show scenes from my life. I saw myself as a child, sitting in church next to my mother, arms crossed, face showing boredom. This is nonsense, I had told her, seeing her sad expression and silent prayer. Then, as a teenager, I argued with a religion teacher at school. God doesn't exist. All this is just a crutch for the weak. The mirror didn't just show memories. It showed the impact of my words, the pain I caused, and the closed doors to faith I now wished I could reopen. Ignorance once colored my world, a shade cast by arrogance and a lack of understanding. I recall moments in my youth when my wit brought laughter from my peers, yet the teacher's compassionate gaze was a silent rebuke. One day, you'll realize how wrong you are, he seemed to say. Fast forward to my adult life, where gatherings with friends turned into mockery of faith, internet debates where I hurled insults at believers, and the disdain with which I labeled anyone praying on the street as a fanatic. I prided myself on my self-sufficiency, declaring with a sneer that only the weak needed God. Then came the day in the hospital, the day my mother passed away. There she lay, frail, with tubes at her nose, her fingers clutching a rosary. With contempt, I removed it from her grasp. Mom, enough. God isn't going to save you. The tears in her eyes as she took her last breath, whispering a final prayer, haunt me. I never asked for her forgiveness. The mirror of my life shattered, not into pieces, but into shadows that dissipated into nothingness. The devil's slight bow and sardonic smile were the prelude to my realization. Now you know why you're here, he said, and my throat tightened, choking off any denial. I had damned myself. For the first time, I felt a stirring within me, a foreign emotion called remorse. The devil's smile now held not just mockery, but triumph. See now, all you did in life has brought you here. It wasn't God who damned you, it was you yourself. His words crashed into me with a devastating force. I had lived a life of scorn, mocking those who believed, convinced that I needed no one but myself. Now, I was utterly alone. It's time to meet your new master. With a flick of the devil's hand, the ground gave way beneath me, and I fell. This time, there were no cries or shadows, just an absolute void, a suffocating silence that lasted until I sensed that something immense, ancient, and darker than imagination could conceive. Before me sat Satan on a throne of black stone. His form was an undefined shadow wrapped in black flames that consumed rather than illuminated light. His face was a grotesque collage of deformed features, as if countless screaming souls were trapped beneath his skin. When his eyes met mine, a crushing weight bore down on my chest, stealing my breath and thought. So this is the new one, his voice boomed, a roar echoing through every corner of hell. The mere presence of him was enough to crumble my soul. The demon who led me knelt before Satan in reverence. I brought him personally, it's special, he said. Satan's smile sent a chill through me. I've waited a long time for this, he stated, and my blood ran cold. I tried to speak, to move, but I was voiceless and motionless. only able to gaze into the eyes of the devil and feel my very essence flickering out. There was no hope, no escape. This was my eternity. Satan raised his hand and snapped his fingers, and the shadows around me tightened. "Welcome home," he said, and all of hell seemed to close in on me. The shadows coiled around my body like invisible serpents, squeezing the life from me. I couldn't move, couldn't scream, and amid the agony, I understood that this was the end. There was no second chance. In a moment where there seemed to be no escape, Satan continued to smile, relishing my despair. My soul was already his, shadows creeping up my neck, ready to consume me in seconds. Yet, something unexpected occurred. A resistance within me stirred a faith I had long ignored and buried under my arrogance. The last echo of my lost faith, the memory of my mother, her voice rang in my mind, urging me never to stray from God, to call out his name in times of loss, for he always listens. My soul shivered with this realization as Satan raised his hand for the final blow. With the last ounce of strength I possessed, I did the only thing left to me. I cried out a name I had denied all my life, Jesus. The word left my lips with desperation, with my entire being, fear, and repentance. In that instant, hell trembled, Satan roared in anger, and the demon before me stepped back in terror. The ground cracked, shadows scattered, and a light appeared, a golden, pure light, foreign to this dark place. It was the first time I had seen such a sight since my arrival, and as the demon screamed, I knew what it was. God had heard my cry. A hand emerged from the light. Not a face, just an overwhelming presence filled with love and power, Jesus. When his hand touched me, everything vanished, the hell, Satan, the consuming shadows all gone in a second, leaving only light. It was not a light that hurt the eyes, but a warm, pure glow, as if I was enveloped in an infinite embrace. Then, I felt something I had never felt before: peace. Not the superficial peace of business success or the thrill of debate victories, but a deep, real peace, as if an invisible weight had been lifted from my soul. Then I heard it, a voice strong yet gentle, authoritative but full of love. "It is not your time yet, return." I didn't understand, wanting to ask, to see who spoke, but in a blink, I was torn from the light. I awoke abruptly, gasping as if I'd been drowning. The air burned in my lungs. I was lying on something cold and hard. Voices surrounded me, people shouting. As my vision cleared, I found myself on a hospital gurney, doctors surrounding me, their faces a mix of astonishment and confusion. One doctor, his gown soaked with sweat, staggered away, muttering, "My God, he's back." Another crossed himself. My mind struggled to process it. I had returned. I had been dead, but now I was alive again. I felt something warm on my cheeks, the first real tears I had ever shed. As I sobbed on that gurney, I understood something undeniable: God had given me another chance. Days passed, but I was not the same. Something within me had changed forever. Initially, the doctors couldn't explain it. They had pronounced me dead for 7 minutes. My heart had stopped, my vital signs had vanished. And yet, here I was, breathing, alive. The doctors sought a scientific explanation, but I knew the truth: I wasn't back by chance. When they discharged me, the first thing I did was go home to the same house where I had lived in pride, mocked God, and ignored all signs. I entered my room and searched through my belongings with a racing heart. I knew it would be there. After a few minutes, I found it. My mother's rosary, the very one I had once scorned. On the deathbed, where she held her last breath in prayer, I found myself trembling, holding what she clutched with her final whisper. For the first time in my life, I knelt and wept with an indescribable pain, not out of fear or desperation, but for everything that had been and for the truths I had long refused to see. From that moment on, I was never the same. I sold all my possessions, forsaking my life of luxury and arrogance, and began to wander, sharing my vision with others. I warned them of the reality of hell, of the existence of God, and that only the love of God could save us. Many dismissed my story, casting glances of disdain, the same looks of scorn I once gave to believers. They laugh and call me mad, but I remain undeterred. I have witnessed the horror with my own eyes, felt the chilling embrace of darkness, and yet also felt the guiding hand of God pulling me from the abyss. Now I know, beyond any doubt, that He is real and has always been there, waiting for me. If you are hearing this tale, it is because you still have time. Do not wait until it is too late. Hell is not a fable. It is a reality I have faced. My journey is a testament to the transformative power of faith and the eternal hope that God offers to all who seek Him.